In the grand, gilded albums of British royal history, the photographs tell a very specific story. A story of duty, tradition, and flawless lineage. You can see it in the formal portraits of King George V and his family, a line of perfect, well-dressed children destined for greatness. But look closer at the photos from the early 1900s. Count the children. In the earliest pictures, there are 5. Then, for a brief time, there are 6. A small, bright-eyed boy stands with his siblings. And then, he's gone. From official portraits, from public appearances, from the historical record itself, he vanishes as if he never existed. This was Britain's forgotten prince, a boy whose life became one of the royal family's most closely guarded secrets. His story wasn't of scandal or rebellion. It was a story of a child deemed unfit for public view, locked away from the world, not in a dungeon, but in a quiet country farmhouse, hidden in plain sight. This is the tragic, untold story of Prince John. Our story begins on a summer day in 1905. At Sandringham House, the royal family's beloved country estate, a new prince was born. He was the 6th and youngest child of the future King George V and Queen Mary. They named him John. To the world, it was another happy occasion, another link in the unbroken chain of the monarchy. For a while, everything seemed perfectly normal. The young prince, known affectionately to his family as Johnny, was, by all accounts, a charming and lively child. He was doted on by his grandmother, Queen Alexandra, and took his place in the bustling royal nursery alongside his older siblings. These were the children who would shape the 20th century, the future King Edward VIII, the future King George VI, and their brothers and sister. Johnny was part of this world of nannies, tutors, and strict royal protocol. He was described as big and handsome for his age, with a mischievous sense of humor that sometimes broke through the stiff formality of court life. But as Johnny grew from a baby into a little boy, something began to change. Around his 4th birthday, the first shadow fell. Without warning, Johnny began to suffer from epileptic seizures. Today, epilepsy is a well-understood neurological condition, but in the early 20th century, it was shrouded in fear, ignorance, and a terrible social stigma. It was seen not as a medical issue, but as a sign of a deeper problem, a defect. It was often linked with madness and institutionalization. For the royal family, an institution built on an image of perfection and hereditary strength, this was more than a private tragedy. It was a potential crisis. The king, George V, was a stern and demanding father. He famously once said, "I was afraid of my father, and I am going to make sure my children are afraid of me." He valued discipline and duty above all else. A child who was unpredictable, who could not be controlled, simply did not fit into his world. Queen Mary, while a loving mother in her own reserved way, was a woman bound by the rigid expectations of her time and her royal duty. As Prince John's seizures continued, it also became clear that he was different in other ways. He struggled with learning and didn't behave in the way a young prince was expected to. Some modern historians, looking back at the descriptions of his behavior, believe he may have also been on the autism spectrum. He was known for making unfiltered, honest remarks that could be both hilarious and highly inappropriate in the formal settings of the court. He was an individual in a world that demanded conformity. The family was faced with a choice: How could they manage a child with such a visible and misunderstood condition while upholding the flawless image of the monarchy? Their solution was quiet, discreet, and ultimately heartbreaking. They decided to hide him. Slowly but surely, Prince John began to disappear from public life. He was quietly withdrawn from his appearances on the Buckingham Palace balcony. He no longer attended family events where photographers might be present. The official reason given was simply that he was not in strong health. The world, on the cusp of the First World War, was distracted by larger events, and the absence of the youngest prince went largely unnoticed. He became a whisper, a memory, and then nothing at all. While his brothers were sent off to Naval College and prepared for their royal destinies, a different future was planned for Johnny. In 1917, a separate household was established for him. He was moved to Wood Farm, a secluded house nestled in a corner of the vast Sandringham Estate. It was here that he would live out the rest of his life, away from the prying eyes of the public and the rigid demands of the court. This wasn't a cruel imprisonment in a cold, dark tower. Wood Farm was comfortable, a place of peace and quiet. But it was a gilded cage. Prince John's world shrank to the size of this farmhouse and its gardens. His primary companion, his caregiver, and his fiercest protector was his nanny, Charlotte Bill, whom he called Lala. Lala had been with Johnny since he was a baby, and she became the central figure in his isolated world. She was more of a mother to him than the queen ever could be. Life at Wood Farm was structured and simple. Lala created a safe and loving environment for the young prince. He had his own garden, which he was encouraged to tend. His grandmother, the Dowager Queen Alexandra, who had a country house nearby, was a frequent and loving visitor. She had a genuine affection for her forgotten grandson and insisted on a garden being created for him. She would bring him to her own house to play, one of the few places outside of Wood Farm he was allowed to go. To prevent him from being completely alone, local children were sometimes brought in to be his playmates. By all accounts, he was a happy child within his limited world. He was known for his witty remarks and a playful nature. There's a story that he once played a prank on his grandfather, King George, by pushing the brake on his motor car, sending the king stumbling. This was the real Johnny, a boy full of life and personality, hidden away from the world that was supposed to be his birthright. But the isolation from his immediate family was profound. His parents and siblings rarely visited. Their lives were filled with royal duties, and a visit to Wood Farm was a journey into a different reality, one they seemed unable or unwilling to confront regularly. His brother, Prince Edward, later the Duke of Windsor, recalled him with a cruel detachment. He described Johnny as more of an animal than anything else, a boy whose death was little more than a regrettable nuisance. This cold assessment reveals the immense gap that had grown between the forgotten prince and the family that had sent him away. As Johnny grew into a teenager, his condition worsened. The seizures became more frequent and more severe. Lala, his devoted nanny, managed his care tirelessly, but the strain was immense. He was growing into a young man, but his mind and body were failing him. The secret of Wood Farm was preserved, but the boy at the center of it was fading. Then, on the 18th of January 1919, the inevitable happened. After suffering a severe and violent seizure, Prince John passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was just 13 years old. The news was delivered to his parents, the king and queen. Their reaction, preserved in their own private diaries, is a complex mixture of genuine grief and a kind of somber relief. Queen Mary wrote in her journal about the shock of the news. She wrote of their poor, darling little Johnny and how he had passed away suddenly. She and the king traveled to Wood Farm to see Lala and to look upon their son's body one last time. But her diary entry also contains a line that is both chilling and deeply revealing of the time. She wrote, "For him it is a great release, as his malady was becoming worse, and he has thus been spared much suffering. I cannot say how grateful we feel to God for having taken him in such a peaceful way." His death was seen as a mercy, an end to the family's great anxiety. The official announcement from the palace was brief. It stated that the prince had passed away following an illness. To the public, it was a sudden shock. Most people had forgotten the royal family even had a sixth child. The newspapers ran short, respectful obituaries, but there were no grand public outpourings of grief. How could there be? The public had never been allowed to know him. He was buried in a quiet churchyard near Sandringham, in a private funeral attended only by close family and staff. His life, which had begun with the promise of a prince, ended in near total obscurity. For decades after his death, Prince John was effectively erased from the royal narrative. Official biographies of the family barely mentioned him. He was an inconvenient truth, a footnote in a story that was meant to be about strength and continuity. The secret was kept not through force, but through silence, and the powerful deference that the public and the press showed the monarchy at the time. The world moved on, and the forgotten prince was truly forgotten. His story remained buried in the royal archives for nearly 80 years. It wasn't until the late 1990s that his existence began to re-emerge into the public consciousness. Biographers, granted access to private royal records and letters, pieced together the fragments of his short life. They discovered the loving letters from his grandmother, the sad diary entries from his mother, and the story of his quiet exile at Wood Farm. The tale was brought to a global audience in 2003 with the release of an award-winning film called The Lost Prince. For the first time, the world saw the human story behind the secret, the story of a lonely little boy, the devotion of his nanny, and a family trapped between their love for a child and their duty to the crown. The story of Prince John is more than just a sad tale. It's a window into a different era. It shows us a royal family obsessed with image, terrified of any perceived weakness, and unable to cope with a child who didn't fit their perfect mold. It's easy to judge them by today's standards, but they were products of their time, a time when disability was something to be hidden, not understood. In a strange way, the life Johnny lived at Wood Farm might have been kinder than a life spent struggling under the relentless glare of public scrutiny. He was spared the brutal pressures that were placed on his siblings. He was cared for by someone who loved him unconditionally. He had a garden and playmates and the affection of his grandmother. But he was denied the one thing that should have been his by right, a place in his own family. His story stands in stark contrast to the modern royal family, which now openly champions causes related to mental health and speaks about the importance of family. It serves as a powerful reminder of how much things have changed. Prince John's life was short and secluded, a secret kept for generations. He wasn't a king, a warrior, or a statesman. He was just a boy. An innocent victim of the time and the system he was born into, a forgotten prince whose quiet story reminds us that even in the grandest of families, the most human tales are often hidden from view. If you found this story compelling, consider subscribing for more journeys into the untold chapters of history.